I want to open this video a little differently and begin with a positive message to each and every one of you watching right now. There may have been times in your life that things didn't go quite as you wanted them to, or you might have had a few embarrassing moments along the way, possibly even a failure or two. But I want each and every one of you to know, from the bottom of my heart with complete and genuine sincerity, that no matter how much you might have messed up in the past, you will never be as big a failure as the writers on this show. How they managed to get hired for such a big budget, important series like this one just boggles the mind. Every single thing within this episode falls into one of two categories. Either it makes no sense at all, or it's stupid beyond comprehension, with some of them falling into both categories. Obi-Wan is bad. Episode 5. This one begins with a flashback during the prequel series where Anakin and Obi-Wan were sparring. We can clearly see that Anakin still has his Padawan braid, which means that this time period is probably around the second movie. And yet I can't help but notice that Anakin looks like he's in his 40s.
How do you do, fellow kids?
To remind you, this is what he looked during the prequel movies, and yet this is what he looks like in this show. You would think that perhaps someone might have suggested using some sort of makeup or prosthetics or even digital de-aging to make the actor look closer to how he was supposed to, but I guess not. It's pretty clear that the people creating this show just really don't care, and if that wasn't abundantly obvious already, you can expect to see more of it throughout the rest of this episode. Continuing, Reva has arrived on Darth Vader's ship, where she's promoted to the position of Grand Inquisitor. She informs him that the tracker has worked, and so they set course for the planet with Obi-Wan and the rebels. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan's group has arrived at the planet, and Obi-Wan asks if they can transport Leia back to her home. But the bearded guy, who apparently is in charge of this place, says that he can't bring her just yet because they need to use the ship to transport the other people that are in the base who have been waiting for months. Now, right away, you might think, okay, that kinda sorta makes sense, but later in this episode, we're going to learn something that is going to make all of this extremely nonsensical and stupid. However, before they can start loading people into the ship, Vader's cruiser arrives in orbit, and Reva uses Leia's droid to override the hangar doors in order to trap everyone inside. The little droid flies over to this maintenance cover, and for some reason, it just magically opens when the droid gets close, and then magically closes when the droid is inside. This isn't some sort of power door that you would have to press a button. It is quite literally just a metal grate on some hinges. What's weird about all this is that the little droid does have an arm that it could have used to open the door, so I have to ask, why did the writers do this? Did they just forget? Did they not have enough money in the budget for CGI? Or were they just stupid and lazy about this and figured it would be easier to have someone off camera use a stick to open and close the door?
And your script ain't worth the buffalo shit on a nickel.
I'm fairly certain that all of you are able to guess which one of those is the correct reason. Regardless, the droid is able to close the hangar doors and lock them. Obi-Wan comes up with a plan to lock all of the other doors and then take up a defensive position so that they have time to override the hangar and then escape on their ship. But that's a really stupid plan because they know that there's an Imperial battlecruiser in orbit. Their transport ship wouldn't stand a chance in any kind of a fight and could not possibly hope to outrun it.
Not a great plan.
If the ship did manage to get off the surface and into space before being completely destroyed by the cruiser, then it would just get chased down and captured. This is the exact same thing that happened in the opening scene of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. But then again, the interviews with the writers have already confirmed that they didn't actually watch the movies anyways, so it shouldn't come as any surprise that they wouldn't know about this.
I hate this. It is revolting.
Outside, a bunch of the Imperial forces have landed, and stormtroopers begin lining up at one of the entrances, and they're led by the super genius Reva. This leads into a scene that I think was supposed to try to make her look strong and intimidating, but instead it just makes her look like a screeching moron. And that's because for several minutes she gives commands to the stormtroopers to use a heavy blaster on the blast doors.
Can you see where this is going?
Hey, Reva, hey. I know the writers want us to believe you're really smart for making the connection of Obi-Wan and Senator Organa when even Vader and Palpatine couldn't do it? But why aren't you able to make the connection between blasters and blast doors? You know, the things that were built and designed specifically to be resilient to blasters? Why can't you make that connection? Why are you wasting time having your troops shoot pointlessly at the door that was specifically designed to be resilient to it? Don't you think there might be a better way to get inside? Like maybe a tool or a weapon that could cut the doors? Like maybe a sword or a saber? Perhaps you could even get one of those fancy ones that are made of energy, and that way you could get inside really easy and then send your troops in. Wouldn't that make a lot more sense than spending 20 minutes having your troops pointlessly shoot at the door? Don't you think that would be a better idea? Hey, Reva, why are you so dumb?
I wonder if you're the worst person I've ever met.
Back inside, they can't seem to get the hangar unlocked remotely, so Leia volunteers to climb inside the vent and do it manually. The main technician guy claims that he can't go inside because he's too big to fit, which does seem to be true, but I have to wonder why nobody else could possibly fit. After all, a full-sized adult probably built it, so why can't someone else get inside? Like perhaps the pilot that we saw in the previous episode, who could have easily fit in that area and would likely have had the knowledge to fix whatever is going on. But instead, they decide to allow Leia, who was a completely untrained child and knows absolutely nothing about how this equipment worked, to go into the vent and try and repair it.
What an idiot.
Later on, the stupidity will be summarized with a single piece of dialogue where they tell her in order to fix it, all she has to do is find and flip a red switch or something. Which again forces me to ask that if it's so easy, then why didn't someone else like the pilot just go up and do it? Obi-Wan then gets a message from Senator Organa saying that he hasn't heard from Obi-Wan in a while, and therefore he's going to head to Tatooine in order to watch over Luke, because clearly he did such a great fucking job protecting Leia, maybe he'll do better with Luke.
Liar!
Back outside, Super Genius Reva still has the stormtroopers pointlessly shooting at the door, which of course is still doing nothing. Obi-Wan sends a message to her that he wants to talk, so she finally tells the stormtroopers to stop. She walks up to the base where the two of them have a conversation through the door. This is where we learn some of the backstory behind Reva. She reveals that she knows Anakin was Vader because she saw him when he attacked the Jedi Temple during Order 66. She was a youngling at the time and somehow survived. I suppose I should mention that I predicted all this within the first few moments of the first episode. Seriously, it took me less than 10 seconds to figure it out. And there's a close-up of a black girl who is probably going to end up being Third Sister, who is the main character of this show, and we'll get into that later. Though, to be fair, it wasn't all that difficult, and taking a victory lap doesn't feel as satisfying as it should, given the gross ineptitude of the writers. It's kinda like Michael Jordan dunking on a 3-year-old. Sure, it still counts, but it wasn't exactly a challenge. Eventually, Obi-Wan comes to the conclusion that Reva doesn't want to serve Vader, but rather that she hates him and wants to destroy him. And I want to point out that Reva is having this emotional breakdown while standing next to the door, and every single stormtrooper in the area can see her. But this goes into something that I mentioned in a previous video, where the writers don't take anything into account unless it is currently being shown on screen. Everything that's off screen just simply stops existing to them. Keep in mind that Reva has to talk at an above normal level so that Obi-Wan can hear her on the other side of the giant metal door. There is absolutely no doubt that the stormtroopers only 15 feet away could easily hear everything that she's saying, which is essentially that she wants to kill Vader. What she's saying would definitely cause alarm among the stormtroopers, but the show creators completely ignore this because they want to have the stupid emotional moment intended to make the audience feel sympathetic towards Reva. However, there are a couple of problems with this beyond what I just mentioned. First is that Reva comes across as a complete bitch during this entire discussion, making her even more unlikable. And the second is that she's asking some really stupid questions. For example, She asks Obi-Wan where was he when Anakin was attacking the Jedi Temple. And this is a dumb question because she would have already known the answer. He was working with the clone troopers, and they would have reported on his location. The missions were also part of a larger offensive that absolutely would have been known by Palpatine and others in the government and the military, and the Inquisitors definitely would have been briefed about this. But she tries to guilt trip him, asking why he didn't stop Anakin and why he didn't save the younglings. Again, Ririva knows the answers to these questions. She knows that Obi-Wan was on a different mission and that he was in another part of the galaxy. This is just forced nonsense to try to make her sympathetic to the audience, and it fails utterly.
You don't have any friends. Nobody likes you.
And of course, the writers don't allow Obi-Wan to defend himself or give any answers to these absurd questions. In fact, they don't even allow him to mention the fact that he's the one that ultimately defeated Anakin and left him in severely wounded condition that he's currently in. What Obi-Wan should have said is that, no, I couldn't stop him, and it pains me to say that, but I was on a mission that had me on another planet in a different part of the galaxy. But as soon as I found out, I went and I stopped him. But of course the writers won't allow that, so he just stands there like an idiot. Then Ririva suddenly starts acting tough again, and finally realizes that, hey, idiot, you have a lightsaber, which she then uses to effortlessly cut open the door, and all the stormtroopers begin rushing inside. You know, the thing that probably could have happened about 20 minutes ago. It's very important to note that Ririva wasn't able to get through the door because of some intelligent or logical decision-making, but rather because she was just lashing out like a petulant child.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
As the stormtroopers begin advancing, the rebels retreat further back into the base. We then get one of the most hilariously pathetic, unearned emotional moments in the entire series, even worse than what we just saw. During the fight, the Sand Snake is injured and unable to escape through the door with everyone else. So then the show begins moving in slow motion with very dramatic music playing in the background.
You're thinking, people gonna die?
And that's because the Sand Snake decides to use a thermal detonator to take herself out, as well as a bunch of stormtroopers in the process. Obi-Wan watches helplessly, like he always does, as the door closes in front of him. I feel like I want to cry, not because it's sad, but because of how awful it is. The slow motion thing lasts for about a minute and a half, despite the Sand Snake character only having about 10 minutes of total screen time over the course of the entire series. So this slow motion, cringe fest, eye-rolling nonsense makes up a good percentage of her total screen time. And yet the writers expect us to have some sort of deep-felt emotional attachment to the character, as if she is incredibly significant to the story and some sort of longtime fan favorite. But the truth is that absolutely no one cares about this character. I'm willing to bet that most people who watch this show, even the ones that enjoyed it for some bizarre reason, probably can't even tell me the name of the character. This whole thing is indicative of a much larger problem within all of Hollywood. The writers want you to have an immediate attachment to these characters that is the equivalent of a longtime fan favorite. They fully and honestly expect the audience to love What's-Her-Face just as much as they do Obiwan Kenobi, and it's absurd. They operate under the ridiculous notion that the audience should care about a character simply because it checks off the right diversity boxes, because for them and other woke weirdos, that is what is most important. They don't feel as if anything needs to be earned, and this is why writers like the ones on this show get upset when they don't understand why people don't immediately like the characters they create. A perfect example of this is what happened with the Batwoman show. Those writers didn't understand why people didn't like the series despite them having checked off as many diversity boxes as possible. And when that didn't work, their solution was to create more characters that checked off even more diversity boxes. They can't find the proper solution because they don't understand the problem itself. They don't understand that for an audience to enjoy a character, it needs to be earned. That's why this 1.5 minute slow motion death scene for the Sand Snake is utterly absurd. As I said, no one, and I mean no one, cares about this character. Dragging it out and trying to force it won't change that.
My emotions! My emotions!
Continuing, Obi-Wan decides that there's no way for them to fight their way out, so he needs to give himself up to buy more time for the others. This is probably the first heroic thing that he's actually done in the entire series. Oh sure, he went and rescued Leia, but don't forget, he did so grudgingly. But don't worry, it gets worse. Obi-Wan opens the door where the fight had just occurred, and there's a bunch of stormtroopers dragging away bodies. But for some stupid reason, not a single one of them is actually guarding the door with weapons in any sort of ready position. At any time, the rebels could have just opened this door, bursting through, and took out every single stormtrooper in the area. But luckily for them, and their stupidity, it's just Obi-Wan who's giving himself up. But unfortunately, this leads to easily the worst image in the entire series. Obi-Wan is dragged out and put on his knees in front of strong female character.
What is the symbolism there?
And make no mistake, this image was very deliberately done and is exactly what Disney and other woke weirdos in Hollywood are striving for. There are several things in this image. First is the obvious, hateful woke weirdo bigotry, namely that black female character should always be in a position of power over white male character. That's a given in current year content. But there's also something a little more subtle, and this is something that Disney has been striving for since the beginning of the sequel trilogy, and that is the replacement of the old with the new. But the way that in which Disney has done this has been nothing short of disrespectful, portraying old characters like Han and Luke and now Obi-Wan as stupid, weak, cowardly, and inept. Everything from the old Star Wars that people loved must be destroyed in order to make way for the new.
Nobody ever wanted to see that shit.
Meanwhile, Leia has managed to find the big red button that opens the hangar door and also recovers her droid. Outside, Obi-Wan is on his knees pleading with Riri, and eventually they come to a deal. She takes him back inside the building, allowing Obi-Wan to run back to the other rebels. When Vader arrives on the planet, Riri tells him that Obi-Wan is being held inside. Moments later, Vader enters the large hangar area and the transport ship begins to fly off. Using the Force, Vader stops the ship mid-flight, showing that he has incredible reaction speed, and this is going to be important in the next few minutes. Using the Force, Vader pulls the ship to the ground and then tears it apart only to reveal that there's no one inside.
Yeah, I pulled a sneaky on you.
On its face, this scene should be kinda cool. After all, this is the sort of thing that most fans would like to see from Vader. Unfortunately, the only way for this scene to happen is by including a bunch of other stupidity.
You make me sad.
Remember how earlier in the episode when Obi-Wan was told that they couldn't bring Leia back to her planet right away because they needed to use that ship in order to get all of the other people off the planet to escape, and that they had been waiting for this one transport ship to return from its mission, and that those people had been waiting for months? Well, as it turns out, there's a second ship in the hangar, and all of those people have gone onto that one, and they use that to escape while the first one is being used as a decoy.
Convenient.
To be clear, the second ship wasn't a surprise Deus Ex Machina, as you can briefly glimpse it at the beginning of the episode, but this brings up other questions. If the other people had been waiting months to get off the planet, then why didn't they just use the second ship? Even if the first one was being used on the Leia rescue mission, they could have used the second one. And don't tell me it's because there weren't any pilots available. That is nonsense. On the Leia rescue mission, all 5 of those people were able to fly ships. Obi-Wan, the Sand Snake, the main guy, and the 2 others, all of them are pilots. They're all capable of flying ships. You're telling me that in the dozens and dozens of other people that had stayed behind on the planet, that not a single one of them knows how to fly something? That is nonsense. Keep in mind that piloting in the real world is not the same as piloting in Star Wars. In the real world, just because you know how to fly a plane doesn't mean you know how to fly a helicopter. But in Star Wars, it is different by design. It is interchangeable and universal. If you know how to pilot one thing, then you pretty much can pilot almost anything else in the Star Wars universe. It could be an X-Wing, or a Snowspeeder, or a TIE Fighter, or an AT-AT, or a transport shuttle, or an Imperial cruiser. It doesn't matter. Almost everything in Star Wars, the piloting is interchangeable and universal. We have seen this time and time and time again, where if you know how to pilot pretty much anything, you can pilot something else. This is why it's all the more unbelievable that those people were stuck on the planet for months and had to wait for the main guy to come back from that Leia mission. Probably half of them could have flown the second ship, and they could have left the planet much, much earlier. But don't worry, it gets worse. Vader stopped the first ship using the Force, but for whatever reason, he decided to just let the second one go. This is the stupid fire trick from the third episode all over again. Vader used the Force to extinguish a fire so that he could have the stormtroopers capture Obi-Wan, but when the fire is relit by the Sand Snake, he just forgets how to use the Force to extinguish the fire for a second time. This is the same situation. He uses the Force to very quickly react and grab the first ship, but for whatever reason, he just decides not to do it on the second ship. This is a scene that should have made Vader look awesome, but instead it makes him look like an idiot as he just stares longingly into the sky as he allows the second ship to get away.
You don't have a better bad idea than this? This is the best bad idea we have, sir.
What's even more annoying about all of this is that they could have actually had this similar situation play out in a logical way by having the second ship take off almost immediately after the first one had been captured by the Force. Vader was using all of his concentration to stop the first ship, and that would have been the ideal time for the rebels to launch the second ship while he was distracted. That could have made a plausible scenario where Vader wasn't able to grab the second ship because he was entirely focused on stopping the first one. But instead, they waited until after the first ship had been brought to the ground and torn apart before deciding to launch the second one, which Vader could have easily stopped. Regardless, Reva sneaks up behind Vader and tries to attack him. In a surprise twist, the writers actually make Vader win this fight instead of strong, diverse female character. I guess they must be slipping. Although the choreography in this is still pretty awful, and at some points it looks like an anime fight, but don't get me wrong, anime fights can look cool, just not in live-action Star Wars. Something to point out with the lightsabers the Inquisitors use is that they're actually two lightsabers in one. They can be used in a couple of different ways. The first is just the normal one-handed way. The second is a two-handed, double-bladed version, similar to what Darth Maul did, but it can also be disconnected in the center, allowing the Inquisitor to wield a lightsaber in both hands. During the first half of the fight, Vader just uses the Force, but in the second half, he takes Reva's lightsaber from her and separates it into two pieces. He keeps one for himself, and then he gives the other one to her. And this is a little detail that you should pay attention to because it comes up later. We get another flashback showing that Reva didn't just hide from Anakin during Order 66. He actually found her and stabbed her through the chest and then left her for dead. Back in the present, Vader repeats history by stabbing her in the chest once again. And then it gets really, really dumb. Because now it's revealed that the Grand Inquisitor has been alive this whole time.
Got better.
He gives some stupid speech about how Reva was useful, but now she's not anymore, and now she's going to be left in the gutter where she belongs. And I can't even begin to express how mind-numbingly stupid this entire situation is.
All right, explain this to me like I'm a 2-year-old, okay?
So if you're keeping track, Reva managed to survive getting stabbed through the chest not once, but twice, because she will still be alive at the end of this episode. And also, the Grand Inquisitor was able to survive getting stabbed through the chest. Apparently, getting stabbed through the chest with a lightsaber is, more of an inconvenience than anything else. Well, I guess unless your name happens to be Qui-Gon, then you're just out of luck. As dumb as all that is, it's even more ridiculous that the Grand Inquisitor is still alive to begin with. There is simply no logical reason why this should be happening. Reva attacked the Grand Inquisitor in the second episode. It's safe to assume that she would have called some stormtroopers to come and collect his body, and they would have arrived to see a still unconscious, yet very much alive Grand Inquisitor. And this leads to two possible situations. The first is when Reva had already left the area, the stormtroopers would have immediately contacted her to tell her that the Grand Inquisitor was still alive. Or the second situation is if she is still there, and they told her, hey, this dude is still alive right here, then Reva would have had to immediately act upon that information. She would have taken out the stormtroopers, and she would have finished off the Grand Inquisitor. But in either case, the idea that the Grand Inquisitor would still be alive and that Reva wouldn't be aware of it is ridiculous. But don't worry, it gets worse. Let's say for the sake of argument that Reva had left the area, and for whatever bizarre reason, the stormtroopers didn't alert her that the Grand Inquisitor was still alive. We then have a situation where the Grand Inquisitor wakes up, and he goes and tells Vader about the situation, at which point Vader would have to agree to play along with the charade of pretending that the Grand Inquisitor is dead. But this doesn't make any sense because it's very common for members of the Sith to do this to one another in order to advance in positions. This is the entire premise behind the rule of two, and even Vader was planning to do this in order to take out the Emperor with the help of Luke Skywalker. So Reva doing this to the Grand Inquisitor is not just in line with how the Sith operates, but it's something that absolutely would have been expected. Upon hearing this, there's absolutely no reason why Vader would think that this is some sort of super secret plan by Reva. He would have just expected that, yeah, this is what happens with dark side users. They basically take out their boss in order to advance. Like, this is how it works with the dark side. Therefore, Vader's response would not have been to play along with the charade, but rather he would have punished the Grand Inquisitor for allowing it to happen, or he would have punished Reva for not properly finishing the job. It's entirely out of character for Vader to simply play along with this nonsense.
A character's actions must flow inexorably from his or her established traits.
Regardless, Vader and the Grand Inquisitor leave Reva to die from her injury. You know, the same one that she survived before, and the same one that the Grand Inquisitor survived like 3 days ago. Yeah, they expect her to die, apparently, for some reason, but nope, that's not what happens. Of course she doesn't. Instead, she goes and she starts crawling around, and she managed to find 2 things that are lying on the ground. First is her lightsaber, and remember how it had been separated into 2 pieces earlier in the fight with Vader? Well, now, somehow it has magically off-screen been reconnected. Somehow. Once again, proving that the show creators don't pay any attention to detail because they simply do not care. Anyways, the other object that Reva finds on the ground is a broken communicator that Obi-Wan had dropped. It just so happens to be playing the message that Obi-Wan got earlier in the episode from Senator Organa, and only a couple of words are mentioned, but thankfully one of them is the bestest and most amazing planet in all of the galaxy, Tatooine.
Oh my God!
Which of course means that Reva is going to survive, then she's going to travel to Tatooine, then somehow she's going to manage to find Luke Skywalker, and that's all going to happen in the final episode. And since now she's an enemy of the Empire, she's probably going to end up being the hero of the series, or it's hero of the series. Anyways, as unbelievably awful as this entire show has been so far, I imagine that the final episode is going to be even worse, but something even dumber is that the show creators are now expressing an interest in creating a 2nd season of this travesty. One can only imagine what other ways that they could possibly ruin the character of Obiwan Kenobi. But for now, that's the end of Episode 5.